The evacuation sirens have been silent for 3 hours now, leaving behind only the whisper of wind through abandoned streets and the distant rumble of alien engines. Commander Sarah Chun pressed her back against the cold concrete wall of the subway entrance, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. At 8 months pregnant, she was supposed to be on the first transport off Earth, not hiding in the ruins of what used to be downtown Chicago. The Kithra had given humanity exactly 72 hours to evacuate. Their massive ships had appeared without warning, blotting out the sun with their dark hulls that stretched for miles across the sky. The message they broadcast was simple and terrifying. This world is required for our expansion. You have 3 rotations to remove yourselves or be removed permanently. Sarah had been in the military hospital when the announcement came. The doctors told her she was too close to delivery to risk a journey to the evacuation ships. The baby could come at any time, they said, and the stress of the cramped transport vessels might trigger early labor. They promised her a spot on the medical evacuation craft that would launch on the final day. That was a lie. When she had arrived at the designated pickup point, dragging her emergency pack and fighting through contractions that were getting stronger by the hour, she found nothing but empty concrete and discarded belongings. The medical transport had left early, taking the last of the critical patients and abandoning everyone else deemed non-essential to the evacuation effort. She wasn't the only one left behind. As she made her way through the eerily quiet city, Sarah had encountered others. There was Marcus, an elderly man whose family thought he had already been evacuated. There was little Emma, only 7 years old, who had been separated from her parents in the chaos of the spaceport. There was Dr. James Park, a brilliant xenobiologist who had volunteered to stay behind to study the aliens, but now realized his sacrifice had been forgotten by those in charge of the evacuation. Most heartbreaking of all were the children at St. Mary's Orphanage. 43 kids ranging from toddlers to teenagers, led by Sister Catherine, a nun in her 70s who refused to abandon her charges even when the evacuation coordinators told her there wasn't enough space on the transports for all of them. "Someone will come back for us," she had told Sarah when they met at the orphanage. God wouldn't abandon these innocent souls. But no one had come back. The last ships had departed 6 hours ago, their engines leaving contrails across the sky as they carried humanity to distant stars and the hope of new worlds. Earth was empty now, except for the few hundred souls who had been deemed expendable. Sarah felt another contraction grip her abdomen, stronger this time. She breathed through it the way the nurses had taught her, counting slowly until the pain subsided. The baby was coming whether she wanted it to or not. In a few hours, maybe less, she would be responsible for bringing new life into a world that was about to be conquered by an alien species that saw humans as nothing more than pests to be exterminated. The sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. She peered around the corner and saw Dr. Park jogging toward her hiding spot, his medical bag bouncing against his hip. His face was flushed with exertion and something that might have been excitement. "Sarah," he called out in a loud whisper, "I've been looking for you everywhere. How are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to give birth in the middle of an alien invasion," she replied, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "The contractions are getting closer together." Dr. Park knelt beside her, his eyes kind but worried. "We need to get you somewhere safe and sterile. The orphanage has a medical facility in the basement. Sister Catherine has been preparing it for you." Sarah shook her head. "We can't stay there. When the aliens come, they'll scan for life signs. A building full of children will be the first place they hit." "Actually," Dr. Park said, his voice taking on that tone he used when he was about to share something important, "I think I might have figured out a way to keep us all safe. But we need to move now before the Kithra begin their ground operations." He helped Sarah to her feet, supporting her weight as another contraction hit. Through gritted teeth, she managed to ask, "What kind of plan?" "The old subway tunnels," he explained as they started walking. "They run for miles underground, with multiple exits throughout the city. But, more importantly, I've been studying the Kithra communication frequencies. They use a specific scanning pattern that penetrates about 30 feet underground. The deeper subway levels are nearly twice that depth. Sarah felt a spark of hope, but it was immediately dampened by practical concerns. Even if we can hide from their scans, what about food? Water? Medical supplies? And I'm about to have a baby, James. I need more than just a hiding place. That's the beautiful thing, Dr. Park said, his eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm of a man who had found a solution to an impossible problem. The subway system connects to the old Cold War bunkers that were built in the 1960s. They're stocked with emergency supplies that were meant to last for months. Food, water, medical equipment, even a small power generator. They had reached the orphanage now, a brick building that had stood for over a century and somehow looked even more solid and permanent than the modern skyscrapers around it. Sister Catherine met them at the door, her weathered face creased with worry and determination. "Sarah, dear," she said, taking the pregnant woman's arm, "let's get you downstairs. I've set up everything I could find in the medical supply room." As they descended into the basement, Sarah could hear the voices of the children echoing from the common room. They were singing something, a hymn maybe, their young voices creating a haunting harmony that seemed to push back against the darkness of their situation. She wondered if they truly understood what was happening, or if their innocence was protecting them from the full horror of being abandoned by their own species. The medical room was small, but clean, with a narrow bed and basic equipment that Sister Catherine had somehow assembled. Dr. Park immediately began checking the supplies, his movements efficient and professional despite the circumstances. "This will do," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "We have everything we need for a delivery. And if we can get to the bunkers before the Kithra arrive, we might actually have a chance." Sarah lowered herself onto the bed, her breathing becoming more labored as the contractions intensified. "How long do you think we have?" Dr. Park consulted his watch and the small device he used to monitor alien communications. Based on their pattern with other worlds, they usually begin ground operations 12 to 18 hours after the evacuation deadline. That gives us maybe 6 hours before they start landing troops. "And how long to get to the bunkers?" Sister Catherine asked. "With the children and Sarah in labor?" Dr. Park calculated quickly. "At least 4 hours through the subway tunnels. Maybe more if we have to stop frequently." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. The math was too close, too uncertain. If her labor progressed quickly, they would be trapped in the tunnels when the baby came. If it progressed slowly, they might be caught above ground when the aliens arrived. Either way, she was putting everyone at risk. "You should go without me," she said quietly. "Take the children and get to safety. I'll find somewhere to hide until after the baby comes." The look that Sister Catherine gave her could have melted steel. "Sarah Chun, I have been caring for abandoned children for 40 years, and I have never left one behind. I'm certainly not going to start with you and your little one." Dr. Park nodded in agreement. "We stick together. That's how we survive this." Over the next hour, they organized their desperate escape plan. The children were gathered in the basement common room and told they were going on an adventure to explore the old subway tunnels. The older ones understood the gravity of the situation, but they helped keep the younger children calm and excited rather than afraid. Sister Catherine and Dr. Park divided up the emergency supplies, creating small packs that even the youngest children could carry. They found flashlights, batteries, first aid kits, and enough food and water for several days. The children were surprisingly helpful, organizing themselves into groups and making sure everyone had what they needed. Sarah's contractions were coming every few minutes now, each one stronger than the last. She tried to time them, to calculate how much longer she had, but her mind kept wandering to the impossible situation they all faced. In a few hours, she would bring a child into a world where humanity had been driven from their home planet. Her baby would never see a blue sky that wasn't filled with alien ships, never play in parks that hadn't been claimed by a conquering species. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe Dr. Park's plan would work. Maybe they could hide long enough for the Kithra to lose interest in Earth, or for human forces to return and reclaim their world. Maybe her baby would grow up to be part of the generation that fought back against the aliens and won. The thought gave her strength as another contraction gripped her body. She breathed through the pain and forced herself to focus on the immediate task of survival. "It's time," Dr. Park announced, checking his monitoring device. "I'm picking up the first Kithra landing craft in the atmosphere. We need to move now." Sister Catherine helped Sarah to her feet while Dr. Park gathered the children. They moved through the orphanage like a small army, each person carrying their assigned supplies and helping those who needed it. The older children lifted the younger ones when they got tired, and everyone moved as quietly as possible. The subway entrance was only 2 blocks away, but those 2 blocks felt like miles as they crept through the abandoned streets. The city around them was eerily quiet, with only the distant sound of alien engines growing steadily louder. Street lights flickered sporadically, and abandoned vehicles sat in the middle of intersections where their owners had left them in the panic to reach the evacuation points. Sarah had to stop twice for contractions, gripping Dr. Park's arm as the pain washed over her. Each time, the entire group waited patiently, forming a protective circle around her until she could continue walking. When they finally reached the subway entrance, Sarah felt a mix of relief and terror. The tunnels would hide them from the aliens, but they would also trap them underground with no easy escape route. Once they went down those stairs, they were committed to Dr. Park's plan, trusting their lives to old Cold War bunkers that might not even exist anymore. "Ready?" Dr. Park asked, his hand on the rusty gate that led into the subway system. Sister Catherine nodded, her arm around the shoulders of 2 frightened children. "The Lord will protect us," she said with quiet conviction. Sarah wanted to believe her, but as another contraction hit and the sound of alien ships grew louder overhead, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a tomb rather than a sanctuary. Still, what choice did they have? Above ground meant certain death. Below ground meant uncertainty. And uncertainty was better than no chance at all. They descended into the darkness of the subway tunnels, 44 adults and children plus 1 unborn baby, carrying everything they owned and hoping it would be enough to survive the end of the world. Behind them, the first Kithra landing craft touched down in the empty streets of Chicago, beginning the conquest of Earth. None of them knew that their desperate struggle for survival would become something far more significant than just hiding from alien invaders. None of them realized that the pregnant woman leading their small group would give birth to more than just a baby in the depths beneath the city. She would give birth to hope itself, and that hope would spread through the tunnels and the bunkers and eventually back to the surface, where it would grow into something the Kithra had never encountered in all their conquests across the galaxy. But that was still to come. For now, there was only the darkness of the tunnels, the sound of frightened breathing, and the steady rhythm of footsteps as humanity's forgotten refugees began their journey into the depths of the Earth. The subway tunnels stretched ahead of them like the throat of some massive beast, swallowing their flashlight beams and reflecting them back as pale, wavering ghosts on the tiled walls. Sarah's breathing echoed in the confined space, each exhale visible in small puffs of vapor as the temperature dropped the deeper they went. Dr. Park led the way with his hand-drawn map of the tunnel system, occasionally stopping to check his compass and consult the markings on the walls. Behind him, Sister Catherine kept the children organized in a loose column, with the older ones helping the younger ones navigate the uneven tracks and debris that littered the abandoned railway. They had been walking for 2 hours when Sarah's water broke. She felt the sudden wetness and knew immediately what it meant. The baby was coming now, whether they were ready or not. She gripped the tunnel wall and doubled over as a massive contraction hit her, stronger than any of the previous ones. "James," she gasped, and the single word was enough to bring the entire group to a halt. Dr. Park rushed back to her, his flashlight beam dancing across her face as he assessed the situation. One look was enough to tell him what he needed to know. "Everyone gather around," he called to the group. "We're going to take a break here for a while." Sister Catherine began organizing the children, setting up a small camp using their supplies and creating a comfortable area away from where Sarah was struggling with the intensifying labor. The older children understood what was happening and helped keep the younger ones quiet and occupied. "How much further to the bunkers?" Sarah asked through gritted teeth. Dr. Park consulted his map and tried to keep his voice optimistic. "Maybe another hour of walking, but we can take our time. The deeper we go, the safer we'll be." What he didn't tell her was that his monitoring device had been picking up increased Kithra activity above ground for the past 30 minutes. The aliens were conducting systematic sweeps of the city, their scanners probing every building and underground structure. They were getting closer to the subway system, and it was only a matter of time before they discovered the entrance the group had used. Another contraction hit Sarah, and this time she couldn't hold back a cry of pain. The sound echoed through the tunnels, seeming to go on forever in the darkness. Dr. Park immediately began setting up his medical supplies, creating a makeshift delivery area using emergency blankets and sterilized equipment. "Sister Catherine," he called quietly, "I'm going to need your help with this." The elderly nun nodded and moved to Sarah's side, taking her hand and speaking in soothing tones. "I've helped deliver more babies than I can count," she whispered. "We're going to take good care of you and your little one." As Dr. Park worked, checking Sarah's vital signs and preparing for the delivery, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The tunnels seemed to have eyes, and every shadow could be hiding alien scouts or scanning equipment. The group's flashlights created pools of light in the darkness, but beyond those pools lay an unknown world that could contain anything. "Dr. Park," whispered Marcus, the elderly man who had been helping keep watch, "I think I hear something coming from the direction we came from." Dr. Park strained his ears and caught it too, a faint rhythmic sound that could have been footsteps or mechanical movement. It was distant, but getting closer, and it definitely wasn't human. "Everyone stay calm," he said in a low voice. "Marcus, take 2 of the older children and scout ahead toward the bunkers. See if you can find us a more defensible position. Emma, help Sister Catherine with the younger children. We might need to move quickly." Little Emma, despite being only 7 years old, had proven herself to be remarkably capable during their journey. She immediately began organizing the other children, keeping them quiet and ready to move at a moment's notice. Sarah was fully in labor now, her contractions coming one after another with barely any rest between them. Dr. Park examined her and realized the baby was coming whether they were ready or not. There would be no time to reach the bunkers, no chance to find a proper medical facility. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "The baby is coming now. We're going to do this right here, and everything is going to be fine." She nodded, too focused on breathing through the pain to worry about their circumstances. In this moment, nothing existed except the overwhelming need to bring her child safely into the world. Marcus returned from his scouting mission with troubling news. "There's a junction about 100 yards ahead where the tunnel branches in 3 directions. One of them has markings that match your map for the bunker access, but there's something else down there. I can see lights moving around, and they're not human lights." Dr. Park felt his heart sink. The Kithra had found the subway system and were already exploring the deeper tunnels. Their hiding place had become a trap, and they were caught between advancing aliens and a woman in labor who couldn't be moved. "How long until they reach us?" he asked. Marcus shook his head. "Maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. Their lights are getting brighter." Sister Catherine looked up from where she was helping Sarah. "Then we make our stand here," she said with quiet determination. "God brought us this far, and he'll see us through whatever comes next." Dr. Park wished he shared her faith, but his scientific mind was already calculating their chances of survival. They had 43 children, 2 elderly adults, 1 man with limited combat experience, and a woman in active labor. Against them were alien soldiers with advanced technology, and no reason to show mercy to humans they probably considered inferior beings. But as he looked around at the faces surrounding him, children who trusted him to keep them safe, Sister Catherine who radiated calm strength, Marcus who had appointed himself their guardian despite his age, and Sarah, who was about to perform the miracle of bringing new life into impossible circumstances. Dr. Park realized that something had changed inside him. These people weren't just refugees anymore. They had become a family, bonded together by shared hardship and the common goal of survival. They had chosen to stand together rather than abandon the weak among them. And that choice had transformed them into something stronger than the sum of their individual parts. Sarah's next contraction was the strongest yet, and she bore down with everything she had. Dr. Park could see the baby's head beginning to crown, and despite everything else happening around them, he felt a surge of wonder and excitement. "I can see the head," he whispered. "One more big push, Sarah." The lights in the distance were definitely getting closer now. Through the darkness, they could make out the silhouettes of tall, angular figures moving with mechanical precision. The Kithra had found them. "Sister Catherine," Dr. Park said without taking his eyes off Sarah, "take the children further down the tunnel. Find somewhere to hide until this is over." "Absolutely not," the nun replied firmly. "We stay together no matter what happens." The older children had already formed a protective circle around Sarah and Dr. Park, their young faces set with determination that would have made their parents proud. Even little Emma stood ready to defend the group, clutching a flashlight like a weapon. Sarah pushed again, and this time the baby's head emerged fully. Dr. Park worked quickly to clear the airway and check for the umbilical cord while Sarah gathered her strength for the final push. The alien lights were close enough now that they could hear the strange clicking sounds the Kithra made when they communicated. It was an unsettling noise, like insects or machines, nothing that sounded remotely human or familiar. "One more push," Dr. Park urged. "Your baby is almost here." Sarah gave everything she had, and suddenly, the baby slipped free into Dr. Park's waiting hands. It was a girl, small but perfectly formed, with a lusty cry that echoed through the tunnels and announced her arrival to the world. Dr. Park quickly cleared her airway and wrapped her in a clean blanket while Sister Catherine helped Sarah into a more comfortable position. The baby's cries filled the tunnel with sound, drowning out even the approaching aliens for a moment. But the sound also gave away their position. The alien lights suddenly changed direction, moving directly toward their location. The clicking sounds grew more rapid and urgent, and they could hear the heavy footsteps of the Kithra soldiers echoing off the tunnel walls. "They're coming," Marcus whispered, positioning himself between the children and the approaching threat. Dr. Park finished tying off the umbilical cord and placed the baby in Sarah's arms. Despite their desperate situation, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of mother and child together. In the worst possible circumstances, they had managed to bring new life safely into the world. "What's her name?" Sister Catherine asked softly. Sarah looked down her daughter's face, so small and perfect and innocent of the terrible world she had been born into. "Hope," she whispered. "Her name is Hope." The alien lights rounded the corner, and suddenly the tunnel was filled with the tall, imposing figures of Kithra soldiers. They moved with fluid grace despite their size, their elongated limbs and angular features making them seem like living shadows in the flashlight beams. The lead Kithra stopped when it saw the group, its large, multifaceted eyes scanning the humans with what might have been curiosity. It made a series of clicking sounds, and the other soldiers spread out to surround the refugees. Dr. Park stood slowly, keeping his hands visible and tried to appear non-threatening. "We're not armed," he called out, hoping the aliens had some form of translation device. "We have children and a newborn baby. We're not a threat to anyone." The lead Kithra tilted its head, studying Dr. Park with an intensity that was deeply unsettling. When it spoke, its voice was a strange harmony of tones that somehow resolved into understandable English. "You were to be evacuated," it said, the words precise but lacking any emotion. "Why do you remain on this world?" "We were left behind," Dr. Park replied. "The evacuation ships didn't have room for all of us." The Kithra made more clicking sounds, communicating with its soldiers in their own language. Dr. Park caught fragments of what might have been tactical discussions, but the alien speech was too foreign for him to understand more than that. "This is inefficient," the lead Kithra finally announced. "Your presence complicates our colonization schedule." Sister Catherine stepped forward, still holding one of the younger children. "These are innocent children," she said with quiet dignity. "Surely your people understand the value of protecting the young." The Kithra regarded her with its insectoid eyes, and for a moment Dr. Park thought he saw something that might have been recognition or understanding pass across its features. "Young are important," it said slowly, as if the concept was difficult to translate. "But you are the wrong species for this world now." Little Emma suddenly broke away from the group and approached the lead Kithra. "Dr. Park started to reach for her, but something in her manner stopped him. The 7-year-old walked right up to the towering alien and looked up at it with the fearless curiosity that only children possessed. "Are you going to hurt baby Hope?" she asked simply. The Kithra looked down at her, and then its gaze moved to Sarah and the newborn in her arms. Something changed in its posture, a subtle shift that Dr. Park's xenobiologist training picked up on immediately. "The new offspring," the alien said, its voice carrying a different tone now. "It was born here, in our territory." Dr. Park nodded carefully. "Just a few minutes ago." The Kithra made a series of rapid clicks, and its soldiers responded with what sounded like surprised exclamations. The lead alien studied baby Hope with an intensity that made Sarah clutch her daughter closer to her chest. "This changes parameters," the Kithra said finally. "New life born in claimed territory creates complications in our legal frameworks." Dr. Park felt a spark of hope. "What kind of complications?" But before the alien could answer, alarms began blaring from the devices mounted on the Kithra soldier's armor. The lead alien pressed something that looked like a communication device and listened to a rapid stream of clicking sounds. When the transmission ended, the Kithra looked back at the human refugees with what might have been something approaching respect. "Your evacuation ships," it said. "They have returned to this world with military vessels. Your species appears to be more resilient than our initial assessments indicated." The sound of distant explosions began to echo through the subway tunnels, and Dr. Park realized that humanity had not given up on Earth after all. Somewhere above them, human ships were engaging the Kithra fleet in battle for control of the planet. The lead Kithra made a decision that would change everything that followed. "You will remain here," it told the group. "Our forces are reassessing the situation on the surface. Do not attempt to leave these tunnels until the engagement is concluded." With that, the Kithra soldiers withdrew as quickly as they had appeared, leaving the refugees alone in the darkness with a newborn baby who had somehow managed to complicate an alien invasion simply by being born at the right place and time. As the sound of battle raged overhead, Dr. Park looked around at his makeshift family and realized they had just witnessed something unprecedented. For the first time in the Kithra's long history of conquest, they had encountered something that made them hesitate. They had encountered hope. The sounds of battle above ground had been raging for 6 hours when Dr. Park's monitoring device picked up something unexpected. Mixed in with the alien communications and human military frequencies was a new signal, something he had never encountered before in all his years studying extraterrestrial life. It was music, not human music, but something with rhythm and harmony that suggested intelligence and emotion. The signal was coming from the Kithra fleet, broadcasting on frequencies that seemed designed to reach every corner of the planet. "What is that?" Sister Catherine asked, looking up from where she was helping Sarah nurse baby Hope. The newborn had taken to feeding well, and despite their circumstances, both mother and child seemed to be doing remarkably well. Dr. Park adjusted his equipment, trying to isolate and analyze the strange transmission. I think it might be some kind of cultural exchange signal. The Kithra are broadcasting something, but it's not military communications." Marcus, who had been keeping watch at the tunnel entrance, jogged back to their makeshift camp with news. "The fighting has stopped," he reported. "I can't hear any more explosions, and the alien lights in the distance have changed color from red to blue. Dr. Park knew from his studies that color changes in Kithra technology often indicated shifts in operational status. Red typically meant combat or aggressive action, while blue suggested communication or negotiation modes. "I think something's happening up there," he said, continuing to monitor the transmissions. "The battle seems to have paused, and now both sides are broadcasting these musical signals." Little Emma, who had become the unofficial ambassador between the children and the adults, tugged on Dr. Park's sleeve. "Can we go see what's happening?" "It's too dangerous," Sister Catherine replied before Dr. Park could answer. "We need to stay here where we're safe." But Dr. Park was increasingly convinced that safety might not be found in hiding anymore. The musical transmissions were growing stronger and more complex, and he was beginning to detect patterns that suggested actual communication rather than simple broadcasting. "I think they're trying to talk to each other," he said slowly. "The humans and the Kithra, but not with words, with music." Sarah looked up from her baby, her face showing a mix of exhaustion and curiosity. "How is that possible?" "Music is a universal language," Dr. Park explained, his excitement growing as he understood more of what he was hearing. Mathematical relationships between notes, rhythm patterns, harmonic structures, they would be the same for any intelligent species. If you wanted to communicate with aliens who didn't share your language, music might be the perfect medium. The transmissions were becoming more sophisticated now, with human orchestral pieces being answered by alien compositions that followed similar mathematical structures, but with entirely different tonal qualities. It was like listening to a conversation between species separated by evolution, but connected by the fundamental principles of mathematics and beauty. "Dr. Park," Marcus called from his watch position. "We have visitors coming." This time it wasn't Kithra's soldiers approaching through the tunnels. Instead, a group of humans in military uniforms were making their way toward their position, led by a woman with commander's insignia who looked vaguely familiar to Dr. Park. "Dr. James Park," the commander called out as she approached. "I'm Commander Lisa Rodriguez, Earth Defense Force. We've been looking for survivor groups throughout the city." Dr. Park stood and moved to meet her, relief flooding through him. "Commander, we have 43 children, 2 elderly civilians, and a woman with a newborn baby. We've been hiding down here since the evacuation." Commander Rodriguez's expression softened when she saw the children gathered around Sister Catherine and the baby in Sarah's arms. "My God," she whispered, "you've been down here this whole time?" "The medical transport left without us," Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of bitterness that she quickly suppressed. "We didn't have anywhere else to go." "I'm sorry," Commander Rodriguez said with genuine emotion. "The evacuation was chaotic. A lot of people fell through the cracks. But that's actually why I'm here. Something's happened up there that changes everything." She gestured toward the surface, where the musical transmissions were still playing. "The Kithra have requested a ceasefire to discuss something they call a natal legal complication. They specifically mentioned a human birth that occurred in their territorial space." Dr. Park felt his heart skip. "You mean Baby Hope? Is that the infant's name?" Commander Rodriguez asked. "Because apparently, her birth has created a massive problem for the Kithra legal system. Something about territorial rights and the status of native-born inhabitants." Sister Catherine stood up slowly, her old joints creaking with the effort. "Are you saying this little baby has stopped an alien invasion?" "Not stopped," Commander Rodriguez corrected, "but certainly complicated it in ways no one anticipated. The Kithra have a very complex legal framework governing territorial acquisition. According to their laws, any sapient being born within claimed territory automatically gains certain legal rights that supersede conquest protocols." Dr. Park's xenobiologist mind was racing. They consider the baby a native-born inhabitant of their territory rather than part of the invaded population? Exactly. And apparently, this creates what they call a generational sovereignty conflict in their legal system. They can't simply eliminate or relocate native-born sapients without going through extensive legal procedures that could take years. Sarah looked down at Baby Hope, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, completely unaware that her birth had just thrown an entire invasion fleet into legal confusion. So what happens now? That's what we're trying to figure out, Commander Rodriguez admitted. The Kithra have requested a formal conference to discuss the legal implications. They want to meet with the infant's family and guardians. She looked around at the group of refugees, taking in the children, the elderly nun, the scientist, and the new mother. I think they want to meet with all of you. The idea of going to the surface and facing the aliens who had just conquered their world was terrifying, but Dr. Park realized it might also be their only chance to achieve something more than mere survival. What are the risks? He asked. Unknown, Commander Rodriguez replied honestly. This is completely unprecedented. We've never encountered a situation where alien conquerors got tied up in legal knots over a single birth. Our xenosociologist thinks it might have something to do with their own reproductive cycle or cultural attitudes toward offspring. Marcus, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. In my experience, when someone offers to negotiate, it usually means they need something from you. What do the aliens need from us that they can't just take by force? Commander Rodriguez nodded approvingly at the question. That's exactly what our strategic team is trying to figure out. The Kithra are clearly technologically superior, but they seem to be bound by their own legal and cultural constraints. The birth of a human baby in their claimed territory has somehow triggered protective protocols in their system. Dr. Park was beginning to understand the implications. They're not just conquerors, he said slowly. They're bureaucrats. They have rules and procedures that govern everything they do, including conquest. And Baby Hope's birth has created a legal situation that their rules don't know how to handle. More than that, Commander Rodriguez added, our linguists and cultural analysts have been studying their transmissions. The Kithra seem to have a deep reverence for new life and offspring. It's possible that their entire society is organized around protecting and nurturing the young, which would explain why they're so conflicted about what to do with you. Sister Catherine smiled at this news. Perhaps they're not so different from us after all. Emma tugged on Commander Rodriguez's uniform. Does this mean we don't have to hide anymore? The commander knelt down to Emma's eye level. I hope so, sweetheart. But we need to be very brave and very careful. We're going to go meet with the aliens and try to work something out that keeps everyone safe. Dr. Park felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Somehow, this small group of forgotten refugees had become the key to determining the future of human-Kithra relations. The choices they made in the coming hours could affect the fate of both species. When do they want to meet? He asked. As soon as possible. They've set up a neutral zone at the surface level of the subway station where you first entered the tunnels. Both human and Kithra representatives will be there, along with translation equipment and legal expert for both sides. Sarah looked around at the children who had become her extended family during their time in the tunnels. All of us. All of you, Commander Rodriguez confirmed. The Kithra specifically requested that the Infants Protection Unit be present for the negotiations. I think they see your group as some kind of family structure that they need to understand. Dr. Park realized that the aliens were probably more right than they knew. The shared hardship and mutual protection had indeed created a family bond between all of them, something that transcended blood relations or normal social structures. Sister Catherine, he said, what do you think? Are you willing to risk taking the children to meet with the aliens? The elderly nun looked around at the faces of the children who trusted her completely. I think, she said slowly, that God brought us all together for a purpose. If that purpose is to help two species learn to understand each other, then that's what we'll do. Marcus nodded his agreement. We've come this far together. No point in splitting up now. Commander Rodriguez began explaining the logistics of moving the group to the surface and the security measures that would be in place. As she talked, Dr. Park found himself studying Baby Hope's sleeping face and marveling at the irony of their situation. This tiny infant, born in the worst possible circumstances to parents who had been abandoned by their own species, had somehow become the most important human being on Earth. Her existence had forced a powerful alien species to pause their conquest and reconsider their actions. But more than that, she had given them all something they thought they had lost forever. She had given them hope that the future might hold possibilities they couldn't imagine, that even in the darkest circumstances, new life could change everything. As they prepared to leave the safety of the tunnels and face whatever waited for them on the surface, Dr. Park realized that Baby Hope had already achieved something remarkable. She had proved that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons or their ability to fight. Their greatest strength was their capacity to create new life and protect it against all odds, to form families from strangers and find love in the darkest places. That was something worth fighting for, something worth negotiating for, and something that even alien conquerors might find worthy of respect. The journey to the surface began with 44 humans and one baby who had just changed the course of galactic history simply by being born. None of them knew what they would find when they emerged from the tunnels, but they climbed toward the light together, carrying hope in their arms and determination in their hearts. Above them, two civilizations waited to discover whether the birth of a single child could be enough to bridge the gap between species and create something neither had ever imagined possible. The subway station had been transformed into something that looked like a diplomatic venue from a science fiction movie. Tables and chairs had been arranged in a circle with translation equipment and recording devices scattered throughout the space. Human military personnel stood at one side, while Kithra representatives occupied the other, their tall, angular forms creating strange shadows in the artificial lighting. Dr. Park emerged from the tunnel first, followed by Commander Rodriguez and the rest of their group. The children stayed close to Sister Catherine, their eyes wide as they took in the sight of the aliens they had only glimpsed briefly in the darkness below. The lead Kithra that had encountered them in the tunnels was present, along with several others wearing what appeared to be more elaborate armor or ceremonial dress. Their multifaceted eyes tracked the movement of the humans, and Dr. Park noticed that their attention focused particularly on Sarah and Baby Hope. "Welcome," said a human voice from speakers around the room. Dr. Park realized that one of the Kithra was speaking through a translation system, its words being converted into English in real time. "I am Subcommander HFY Seskar of the Kithra Colonial Authority. We have requested this meeting to address the legal complications arising from the natal event that occurred within our territorial claim." Commander Rodriguez stepped forward as the human representative. "I am Commander Lisa Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Force. These are the individuals you requested to meet with, the family group that was caring for the mother and child when the birth occurred." THY Seskar's attention moved to Dr. Park. "You are the one designated as medical provider for the natal event. Dr. James Park, xenobiologist and emergency medical technician," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the surreal nature of addressing an alien invasion force. "I assisted with the delivery, yes. And the protective unit for the offspring?" THY Seskar's gaze swept across Sister Catherine and the children. Sister Catherine stepped forward with quiet dignity. "I am Sister Catherine. These are the children in my care, and we all help protect the mother and baby during their time of need." Dr. Park watched the Kithra representatives exchange rapid clicking sounds, their communication too fast and complex for the translation system to follow. He caught fragments of what might have been legal terminology, but the alien concepts didn't translate well into human language. "We must understand the nature of your social bonding," THY Seskar finally announced. "The offspring Hope was born within territorial space, claimed by the Kithra Colonial Authority. According to our legal framework, this grants her status as a native-born sapient with territorial rights. However, these rights extend to her immediate family and protection unit." Commander Rodriguez looked confused. "What exactly does that mean in practical terms?" Another Kithra, wearing more elaborate markings than the others, spoke up through the translation system. "I am legal determiner Vexthal. In our law, native-born sapients cannot be removed from their birth territory without their consent or the consent of their protection unit. Since the offspring is too young to provide consent, the decision falls to her guardians. Dr. Park felt his heart racing as he began to understand the implications. You're saying that Baby Hope has the legal right to stay on Earth, and we have the right to decide for her. More complex than that, Vexthal replied. The offspring has territorial rights, but her protection unit also gains certain legal standing. However, your species' governmental structure evacuated the territorial space, effectively abandoning claim to the territory. Sarah, who had been listening quietly while holding Hope, suddenly spoke up. What are you trying to tell us? Are you saying my daughter has more right to be here than your invasion force? The Kithera exchanged more rapid communications, and Dr. Park noticed that several of them seemed agitated or confused by the question. Not more right, Teachwis Iskar said carefully. Different category of right. Colonial law recognizes conquest rights for unclaimed territory, but native birth rights supersede conquest in occupied territory. The legal classification is problematic. Sister Catherine, with the wisdom of her years, cut straight to the heart of the matter. You want something from us? What is it? Vexthal tilted his angular head in what might have been respect. Perceptive. The Kithera Colonial Authority has territorial requirements for our expanding population. However, we also have cultural prohibitions against harming or displacing offspring and their protection units. We seek a resolution that satisfies both requirements. Commander Rodriguez leaned forward. What kind of resolution? Cohabitation, Teachwis Iskar said, and the translated word hung in the air like a challenge. Shared territorial development with preserved zones for native-born populations and their protection units. Dr. Park's scientific mind immediately began analyzing the proposal. You want to share the planet? Humans and Kithera living in separate areas? Initially separate, Vexthal confirmed, with potential for integrated development as understanding between species develops. The offspring Hope represents a unique opportunity for interspecies legal precedent. Little Emma, who had been listening with the intense concentration that children brought to adult conversations they didn't fully understand, suddenly spoke up. Does this mean we can stay here? All of us? The simple question from the 7-year-old seemed to catch the Kithera off guard. They clicked rapidly among themselves before THYSS corresponded. The protection unit would maintain guardianship of the native-born offspring within designated territory. Expansion of protection unit membership would be negotiable. Dr. Park realized that the aliens were offering something unprecedented in the history of their conquests. Instead of simple displacement or elimination, they were proposing a shared world where humans could continue to exist alongside the Kithera colonists. But he also understood that this offer was entirely dependent on their small group, specifically on Baby Hope and their willingness to accept the role of her protection unit in Kithera law. What about the rest of humanity? Sarah asked. The people who were evacuated? Can they come back? Limited repatriation possible, Vexthal replied after consulting with the other Kithera. Family units of protection unit members, specialists required for territorial development, offspring born to mixed species relationships. Commander Rodriguez looked stunned. You're talking about completely restructuring human civilization. Human civilization restructured itself, THYSS Car pointed out with what might have been alien logic. Evacuation eliminated territorial claims. Only native-born offspring and protection unit retained legal standing for re-establishment. Dr. Park looked around at their group. The children who had followed them into the tunnels, Sister Catherine who had refused to abandon any of them, Marcus who had appointed himself their guardian, Sarah who had given birth under impossible circumstances, and Tiny Hope who slept peacefully in her mother's arms. Somehow, their desperate attempt to survive had placed them at the center of negotiations that would determine the future of both species. The responsibility was overwhelming, but as he looked at the faces around him, Dr. Park realized something important. They weren't just a random group of survivors anymore. They had become a real family through shared hardship and mutual protection. They had proved that humans could create bonds that transcended traditional relationships, that they could find strength in caring for others, even when their own survival was uncertain. "We need time to discuss this among ourselves," he said to the Kithra representatives. Executive replied. Deliberation period of 1 planetary rotation granted. Decision required before colonial authority proceeds with territorial development. As the formal session ended and both groups withdrew to their respective areas, Dr. Park gathered his makeshift family together to discuss the most important decision any of them would ever make. "What do you all think?" he asked, looking around at the faces that had become so dear to him over their time in the tunnels. "I think," Sister Catherine said slowly, "that God works in mysterious ways. We thought we had been abandoned and left to die. Instead, we've been chosen to speak for all of humanity in determining our species' future." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "The way I see it, we have 3 choices. We can accept their offer and try to build something new here with them. We can refuse and hope the other humans can negotiate something better from a position of weakness. Or we could try to find a third option that no one's thought of yet." Sarah looked down at Hope, who had slept through the entire historic negotiation. "I want my daughter to grow up in a world where she's safe and loved. I want her to have friends and family and opportunities to become whatever she wants to be. I'm not sure it matters whether those friends are human or alien, as long as they care about her." The older children had been listening intently, and now they began to express their own opinions. Some were excited about the possibility of learning about alien culture and technology. Others were worried about their families who had been evacuated. All of them seemed to understand that this was a choice that would affect the rest of their lives. "Dr. Park," Emma asked, "if we say yes, does that mean we're responsible for everyone? All the humans who might want to come back?" It was a remarkably insightful question from such a young child. Dr. Park realized that accepting the Kithra offer would indeed make them responsible for representing human interests in an entirely new kind of civilization. "I think," he said carefully, "it means we would have the chance to help build something that's never existed before. A world where 2 different species learn to live together and help each other grow." Sister Catherine smiled at his words. "That sounds like the kind of challenge God might give to people he trusts to do the right thing." As they talked through the implications and possibilities, Dr. Park found himself thinking about the musical transmissions they had heard during the battle. Both species had instinctively reached for beauty and harmony when they needed to communicate across the barriers of language and culture. Maybe that was the key to making this work. Maybe the future lay not in humans and Kithra maintaining separate territories, but in finding ways to create something beautiful together, something that neither species could achieve alone. He looked at baby Hope, still sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, and realized that she had already started that process. Her birth had forced 2 very different species to find common ground in their shared reverence for new life and their mutual desire to protect the innocent. If a tiny human baby could accomplish that much just by being born, what might she achieve as she grew up in a world where cooperation between species was not just possible, but necessary? The decision they made in the next 24 hours would determine whether Hope would grow up as a symbol of successful interspecies cooperation or as the last human child born on Earth. Either way, her life had already changed the course of galactic history. Now it was up to her makeshift family to decide what that history would become. The decision came to Dr. Park in the quiet hours before dawn, as he sat watching baby Hope sleep in her mother's arms. Around them, the children were curled up on makeshift beds in the temporary shelter that had been set up for them, their breathing soft and peaceful despite the monumental choice they all faced. They had spent hours discussing the Kithra proposal from every angle. The older children had asked intelligent questions about what their lives would be like in a shared world. Sister Catherine had prayed and meditated on the spiritual implications of their choice. Marcus had analyzed the practical challenges of building a new kind of civilization. Sarah had focused on what would give her daughter the best possible future. But in the end, Dr. Park realized that the decision had been made the moment they chose not to abandon each other in the tunnels. They had already proved that the most important thing about being human wasn't their technology or their territorial claims or their political systems. The most important thing was their ability to create family from strangers, to protect the vulnerable, and to choose hope over fear even when facing the impossible. When morning came, they gathered in the negotiation chamber once again. The Kithra representatives were already present, their alien forms somehow less intimidating than they had seemed the day before. Dr. Park found himself studying their movements and postures, beginning to recognize individual personalities among what had initially seemed like identical beings. "Have you reached a decision?" THYSS Carr asked through the translation system. Dr. Park looked around at his makeshift family one last time, seeing nods of confirmation and nervous smiles of support. Then he stood and faced the alien representatives. "We accept your proposal," he said simply, "but with conditions." Vexthal tilted his angular head. "State your conditions." "First, Dr. Park began, drawing on his years of scientific training to organize his thoughts clearly. "Any human who wants to return to Earth must be allowed to do so, provided they agree to the legal framework you've established. We won't be the only humans here if others want to come back. Acceptable within resource limitations," Vexthal replied after a brief consultation with the other Kithra. "Second, we want to establish educational exchange programs. Human children should learn about Kithra culture and technology, and Kithra offspring should learn about human knowledge and perspectives. Hope is going to grow up in a world where both species exist. She should understand both her heritages." This caused more extensive discussion among the Kithra, with rapid clicking sounds that the translation system couldn't follow. Finally, THYSS Carr spoke. "Educational exchange creates complications, but intriguing possibilities. Acceptable with careful protocols." Sister Catherine stepped forward for the third condition. "We want guarantees that religious and cultural practices will be protected for both species. The children in my care need to maintain their connection to their spiritual traditions, and I assume your people have similar needs. Cultural preservation is required by colonial authority protocols," Vexthal confirmed. "Acceptable." Sarah, still holding hope, voiced the fourth condition. "We want to participate in governing the shared territory, not just as subordinates or protected persons, but as equal partners in making decisions about our shared future." This created the longest discussion yet among the Kithra. Dr. Park could see that the concept challenged their understanding of colonial administration, but he also sensed that some of them found the idea appealing. "Shared governance is unprecedented," THYSS Carr finally said, "but the unique legal status of native-born sapients and their protection units may justify exceptional protocols. Conditional acceptance pending development of appropriate frameworks." Marcus presented the final condition with the practical wisdom of his years. "We want transparent communication about Kithra intentions and capabilities. If we're going to be partners, we need to understand each other's strengths, limitations, and goals." "Reciprocal transparency acceptable," Vexthal agreed. "Cultural exchange requires mutual understanding of capabilities and intentions." Commander Rodriguez, who had been observing the negotiations with growing amazement, spoke up for the first time that morning. "What about the rest of humanity? The evacuation fleets? How do we communicate this arrangement to them?" THYSS Carr made sounds that the translation system rendered as contemplative humming. "Communication to evacuation populations will be transmitted through established channels. Those who wish to return under the new legal framework will be accommodated based on resource availability and security requirements." Dr. Park felt a surge of excitement as he realized the implications. They weren't just saving themselves. They were potentially creating a path for humanity to return to Earth and build something entirely new. "There's one more thing," he said, an idea forming as he spoke. "Hope represents the first generation of humans born under this new arrangement. There will be others, both human and Kithra, who grow up knowing both species as normal parts of their world. I think they're the key to making this work long-term. Explain this concept, Vexthal requested. Dr. Park looked down at baby Hope, who had woken up and was studying the Kithera representatives with the fearless curiosity of a newborn. She doesn't know that humans and Kithera are supposed to be enemies. To her, you're just part of the world she was born into. As she grows up, she'll learn to see cooperation between species as natural, not exceptional. And if other children, both human and Kithera, grow up the same way, Sarah added, understanding where Dr. Park was going with his thought, they'll build relationships and understanding that our generation might never achieve. Sister Catherine smiled at the idea. Children are the future of any species. If our children grow up as friends rather than enemies, they'll create a world we can't even imagine. The Kithera representatives exchanged rapid communications, and Dr. Park noticed something that might have been excitement or enthusiasm in their postures. This concept has merit, HFY Sci-Fi announced. Native-born offspring of both species raised with interspecies cultural education could create unprecedented opportunities for cooperation and advancement. Emma, who had been listening intently to the adult conversation, suddenly spoke up. Does this mean we get to help teach the Kithera children about human games and stories? The question seemed to delight the alien representatives. Cultural exchange would include recreational and narrative traditions, Vexthal confirmed. Kithera offspring would benefit from exposure to human creative expressions. Dr. Park realized that they had just witnessed another small miracle. A 7-year-old human child had just offered to be friends with alien children, and the aliens had accepted the offer with what seemed like genuine pleasure. Then, we have an agreement, Commander Rodriguez said formally. The Earth Defense Force will support this arrangement and facilitate communication with the evacuation fleets. Agreement confirmed, THYSS Carr replied. Colonial Authority will begin preparation of shared territorial development with preservation of native-born sapient rights and establishment of interspecies cooperation protocols. As the formal negotiations concluded and both groups began discussing practical implementation details, Dr. Park found himself holding baby Hope while Sarah rested. The tiny infant looked up at him with bright, alert eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. What do you think, little one? He whispered to her. Ready to help build a new world? Hope made a small sound that might have been agreement, and Dr. Park felt tears of relief and hope running down his cheeks. They had done it. Somehow, a group of forgotten refugees who had been left behind to die had managed to negotiate humanity's return to Earth and the creation of an entirely new kind of civilization. 6 months later, Dr. Park stood in the garden of the new Geneva settlement, watching Hope take her first tentative steps across the grass while Emma and several Kithera younglings played nearby. The settlement was a marvel of cooperative engineering, with human architecture blended seamlessly with Kithera design principles to create buildings that served both species comfortably. The evacuation fleets had returned in waves, bringing back families who wanted to be part of the grand experiment in interspecies cooperation. Not everyone had chosen to return. Many humans preferred the safety and familiarity of the colony worlds, but enough had come back to create thriving communities alongside their Kithera neighbors. Sister Catherine had established the first interspecies school, where human and Kithera children learned together about both cultures. Marcus had become one of the primary negotiators for resource allocation and territorial planning. Sarah had taken a position with the Cultural Exchange Program, helping to facilitate communication between the species. And Hope was growing up exactly as they had predicted, fearless and curious about both humans and Kithera, treating cooperation between species as the most natural thing in the world. Dr. Park called Ticha's car, approaching through the garden with what Dr. Park had learned to recognize as the Kithera equivalent of a smile. The Colonial Authority has approved the next phase of expansion. 3 more settlement zones, with integrated planning from the beginning. Dr. Park nodded, watching Hope reach toward one of the Kithera younglings who immediately helped steady her on her feet. How many human families are interested in the new settlements? More than we anticipated, Teacher Seskar replied. It appears that the success of the first communities has created enthusiasm for interspecies cooperation among both populations. As Dr. Park watched Hope and her interspecies group of friends play together in the garden, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. They had started as abandoned refugees hiding in subway tunnels, convinced they were going to die, forgotten, and alone. Instead, they had become the founders of a new kind of civilization, one based on the revolutionary idea that different species could not just coexist, but actually help each other flourish. Hope toddled over to Dr. Park, reaching up to be picked up. As he lifted her into his arms, she pointed at the mixed group of human and Kithera children playing in the garden. Friends, she said clearly, her first words spoken in a world where the friendship between species was not just possible, but normal. Dr. Park hugged her close and looked out over the settlement where two civilizations were learning to build something beautiful together. Baby Hope had indeed brought hope to the galaxy, proving that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was simply the determination to protect new life and nurture it into something wonderful. In the end, humanity's greatest victory hadn't come from superior weapons or technology or strategic brilliance. It had come from a pregnant woman who refused to give birth alone, a group of children who wouldn't be separated, a nun who wouldn't abandon her charges, and a scientist who believed that understanding was more powerful than conquest. They had been left behind to perish, but instead they had chosen to live, to love, and to create a future that neither species could have achieved alone. And in a garden on Earth where human and alien children played together under a blue sky filled with ships from two different worlds, Baby Hope took her first steps into a future that her birth had made possible.